Hi everyone. This mini lecture is about rhetoric, ethos, pathos, and logos. And we're going to take a look at that passage that we read a little earlier in the module by Frederick Douglass about when he finally escapes and being in New York and what it's like to be free and worried that he could be kidnapped and taken back into slavery. So we're going to take a look at ethos, pathos, and logos in that reading. So let's start with ethos. In the reading, Frederick Douglass begins the reading by saying, "I was frequently asked." By doing this, he establishes his credibility. This means that people went to him, many people went to him and asked him about slavery and what it was like to have been a slave and what it's like now for him. So in this way, he establishes himself as an expert with that one simple phrase, "I was frequently asked." Douglass also uses pathos. Pathos is the appeal to emotions. So he wants to make us feel pity and understand his fear and loneliness. And he says things like, "But the loneliness overcame me. I was afraid to speak to anyone. Money-loving kidnappers lie in wait for the panting fugitive." So there's many places in there where he's using pathos, where you can feel his fear, his loneliness, his insecurity, not being able to trust anybody. And last but not least, Douglass uses logos. So he makes logical comparisons. For example, the slave traders are compared to beasts. He exposes New York as being just as much a part of the slave trade or slave mentality as the South, because he's just as scared there. And, even people who live in the North would be willing to either give up the location of a fugitive slave or even help kidnap them. So logos, remember, is the logical sequence of things. It's the logic. So as you're reading this, the details that Douglass puts together to make his point about how, yes, it was wonderful to be free, but he also lived in fear all the time. That's when he's using logos. So how does this fit with his audience? So the way that Douglass uses ethos, pathos, and logos together, he's taking into consideration his audience. So he's writing a book for people who may very well, they don't have really any of their own experience with slavery because they're in the North. But the South very actively made propaganda to send to the North, to make people in the North think that slavery was actually a kind thing, that the slaves were better off being slaves because they weren't capable of taking care of themselves. They painted pictures, somebody would come down to visit from the North and they'd have all the slaves singing spirituals or something, so that they gave this impression that slaves were happy. Douglass actually talks about that in his book, earlier in the book. So he can use pathos to help people by describing his own experiences. He helps people understand that, no, this is not a compassionate way to take care of people. This is basically just money grubbing, and it's immoral, is another point that Douglass makes, largely through pathos, although he also uses the logos. So we need to think of this as an audience who's had this propaganda that says slaves are happy. So with his pathos, he's showing, no, that's not the case. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of sadness. And then with his ethos, so his ethos is his credibility. So the other thing is that people were reluctant to believe that a slave could read and write, and particularly speak and write the way Douglas could, because he had an amazing vocabulary. He sounded like a very educated man, and he was just completely self-educated from reading. So his ethos, in the beginning of the book, he actually has two high-ranking members of the abolition movement write him introductions, attesting to the truth of the story, that he really was an escaped slave, and attesting to the fact that, yes, he indeed did write this. So Douglas needed some help with his credibility. He needed some celebrity endorsements, so to speak, and he got those in his book. And then, of course, he also does things like what I said. I was frequently asked. So he will remind the reader that he is an expert in this. Okay? Credibility is very important when you're trying to prove a point. I know lately in our society it doesn't seem like it's that important, but if you're not telling the truth or your facts can't be verified, then your argument is on very shaky ground. You can't really prove it. The last thing Douglas does is, of course, logos. In this case, Douglas isn't really supplying us with numbers and data and statistics, which we often think of logos as just being that. The other piece to logos is, how do you make a logical argument? And part of that is having examples so that the reader understands. So the examples are both, pathos, because you're reading about this stuff and it's, he uses a lot of imagery to make it scary. But it's also logos, in that the details that he uses prove his point. It has a logical structure. Logos has to do with the structure of the argument. Do you just say something and then don't do anything to support it? Or do you say something and then provide support? That's also logos. So hopefully this helps you. And I hope you enjoy looking at ads and figuring out whether they're ethos, pathos, logos, or all three, or a little bit of one or another. Okay, take care.